Well, welcome to, I think it's our 63rd Black History Conversation. We've spoken to all sorts of people and had all sorts of interesting presentations, but we've got really special opportunity today to welcome Marika Sherwood. Marika Sherwood's a Senior Research Fellow at the Institute of Commonwealth Studies, an activist and an author and a whole lot of other things. And we're really looking forward to learning more about her work. I'm just going to move us on, though, to say that I acknowledge I'm here in Melbourne, Australia, and I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm currently living, the Wurundjeri of the Kulin Nation, their elders past, present and future. This land belongs to the sovereign people of the First Nations and was never ceded. It always was, and it always will be. And we also need to recognise the issues and challenges that the people of Ukraine are facing at the moment, and our thoughts are with them. Last week we had an opportunity to hear from Dr. Bunmi Oisan. And she was telling us about the work she's doing with Sankofa Pan-African series on YouTube, but she's also an author. So this is just a reminder that one of her most recently published books is called Three Women. And last week as well, we also heard from Annie Domingo about, she introduced herself, and this is just to flag up if people want to check this one out, Breaking the Martha Chain. So I'm sure Annie will be joining us another week. And now, Marika Sherwood. So I've taken this off one of the many sites. So a summary of your research interests and expertise is just vast. History of peoples of African origins in the UK since the Roman period. There's been so much more work I've felt about this more recently, but Marika, I'm sure you are one of the early researchers looking into these stories. Also the Black political activism from the 19th century, Pan-Africanism, 1930s onwards, racism in the UK, including education issues, great deal of work to be done on that. Anti-imperialism, Cold War in West Africa, and also the use of profits from the slave trade and plantations. Some of these areas we've looked at in different sessions, but looking at the commodities has always been an interesting one. And Marika's, there's a lovely piece written about you on the John Blank site, which I thought was particularly relevant to me, where you talk about is the fact you were a Jewish refugee child from Budapest and ended up in Australia, where I am now. And the only history was of the brave British explorers. I have to say these stories are being pulled down quite a lot now. Never mind about statues, but there's some great ways that the truth's being told here in Australia. So you say that the focus was on the glories of Britain and some European history, and you didn't even know about Australian Aborigines. So this gives some background to perhaps where you started and you know what inspired you to do the work that you've done. So I'm going to stop sharing now, Marika, and I'm just going to hand over to you, please, to tell us some more about many of the things some of the things you've been doing, and just share with us where you're at now.
Well, it's not easy to share given all that I've been doing. I came to history very, very late in my life because of my experiences of teaching in schools in London when I came to England in 1965. And I realized, because of the level of racism, how important it was to me that I could speak Hungarian, that I had my childhood in Hungary, that I cooked Hungarian food, that I could read Hungarian books, and that now that I was in England, I would be able to earn enough money to go back and visit Budapest. But the Black kids I was teaching Well, a few learned some of their history from their parents, but they didn't want, even if they did speak their parents' language, they wouldn't tell me that. And what I was discovering was that the white people here in England probably didn't even recognize that Africans had a language, that they had a culture, that they had a history. They didn't realize that those people who went to trade in Africa and discovered it, all they were doing was asking people to lead them in the direction they wanted to go. And of course, there were trade routes all over Africa. So it wasn't difficult to lead them all over Africa, but they didn't want to recognize this. And the tragedy is that it is still not recognized. That is the great tragedy. As one of the founders of the Black and Asian Studies Association, we began discussions with the Education Department, central government, about the curriculum in 1991. Now, how much change has there been in the curriculum? How much change has there been in how the teachers are educated to become teachers? I bet nothing is told them about the history of Africa. Nothing is told them about the history of the Australian Aborigines, even the Maoris of New Zealand. They don't exist. And I don't think it matters whether there's a conservative government or a Labour government. There haven't been sufficient changes at all. And that means that the level of discrimination continues. And it will not stop until people are taught to recognize that a lot of European culture, say English culture, which stems from Greece, in fact, then stems from Egypt, and Egyptian culture there stems from the rest of Africa. You know, they don't want to recognize this. Europe has to be the top dog, and it never had to learn anything from anybody because it had invented everything. And there is something else that I think is very important that the government is doing, which is withholding government files on Black activists. So that if you go to our National Archives and search for information, even on George Padmore, on whom there must be miles of files dating from his time as a young man in Trinidad, and then in America, and then in Moscow, and then in Hamburg, and then in England, and then in Accra. They have released 3 files which are of almost no importance whatsoever. There's not a single solitary file on Claudia Jones. So I think the government is very deliberately withholding the files on Black activists, because if it released them, then other people would be able to say, but why did we have all these Black activists? Just what was going on in this so-called mother country? Not a mother I would like. And I think we need really to begin a campaign for the release of all the documents. And if they have destroyed some of them, I want at least a release of the list of documents that have been destroyed. I know such lists were kept. And the same has to be said for local archives. I'm currently researching a man born in Somalia, probably 1883, 4, 5, something like that, who ended up in Wales, in Barry, from sometime around 1920. And in 1948, he was given an MBE for services rendered to seamen during World War II. Now, is he the first Black man to be given an MBE? How come there's nothing about him in the Welsh archives? Just what was he doing? And there's nothing about him in the National Archives, except 2 pages from a whole file regarding this MBE. So if there's nothing in the Welsh archives and nothing in the Barry archives, then has it all been destroyed? Don't tell me the police weren't watching him, because we know they were, because if you try to search the local newspapers, you get occasional reports about the police and what they were accusing him of doing. So how many other activists were there who, haven't surfaced because I just decided to research him because I didn't know that a black man was awarded an MBE in 1948. So I thought, let me see what I can find. And the article I'm writing will be published in the Welsh history journal called La Fort. But I think people there should campaign for all the research of all the papers in Barry and in Cardiff and in Newport, and then in every major city in England, because we have had black people living everywhere. And I would guess that most of them, one time or the other, became active about some of the racial discriminations they were facing. Any comment, anybody?
Myself, I think that's fascinating. We can see if there are other views. I'd be really interested to know who it is in Wales, because at the moment they're trying to make sure that as many colleagues who are black or ethnic minority are recorded in the there's a Welsh biographies dictionary. I'm not getting my words right here. But that would be really interesting.
Well, I hope Abbey Farrow will be reported, and I hope more research will be done everywhere. Everywhere.
What was his name specifically, Marika?
Abbey, usually spelled A-B-B-Y, and then his family name is Farah, which is F-A-R-A-H, and sometimes it is spelled F-A-R-R-A-H.
Right, okay, thank you for that. Monica?
Yes.
Marcia, sorry, Marcia.
Sorry. I'm wondering, Liz, I think I remember this name when I logged onto the Black Georgians webinar. Did you log on to that, Liz? Or did Simon? But that webinar, I'll find it in a second. The guy who talked about Black Georgians, I think this is a name I recollect from the presentation he did, but let me check.
It's great, thank you very much, Marcia. June Elizabeth, and then Beverly.
Yeah, sorry. This isn't to do with what you were saying, but indirectly, Marika, I can remember you was talking about looking up the records after it was allowed to be looked up of Kelso Cochrane, and the Metropolitan Police had kind of done something similar. You weren't able to get all the records. How did that work out?
Well, I think somebody else has done a bit of research. I'm sorry, but I'm so old that much of my memory has just totally vanished. I think we do now know a little more about Kelso Cochrane, but not all that much. And it really is a tragedy. I mean, one of the things that I have looked at, and I might try to publish a little article about it, is how we deny, I mean the white English, the multi-ethnicity of the population here. And I think, well, just look at the royalty. Just look at the royalty. How many of the royals are actually English? Very, very few. Very, very few. And June Elizabeth, thank you very much. Thank you for all that you have said, and it's lovely to see you. It really is.
Okay.
I must tell all of you that it's not only my memory that's going, but my body is also aging. I will be 85 at the end of this year, so that I can't do much traveling. So I probably will not see any of you again, perhaps except at Zoom meeting. It's very sad, but I have led a very, very, very long life. I've lived in 6 different parts of the world and learned an enormous amount everywhere. Beginning, of course, in New Guinea, where I met the first Black person and who befriended me. He had to hide it. I had to hide it. But he befriended me, and that's how I began to learn about Black peoples and Black cultures and racial discrimination. And I guess I wish that I had darker skin. Oh, I must tell you that I was joking with somebody at the bus stop near this village where I live, and I said, isn't it wonderful? It was when the heat was going up a couple of weeks ago, and it was really hot down here. And I said, oh, everybody will be going out to sit on the beach and to get their skins tanned. But isn't it wonderful that we do that to get our white skins darkened? But we look at people with dark skin and we say, oh, don't want to look like you. We refuse to understand even ourselves. So June, I wish I had your skin color. It's a beautiful color. What we have is totally colorless.
I can remember some of my Jamaican colleagues being in hysterics when I described what it's like to go in a sun tanning machine. Roxanne, you wanted to make a point.
Yes, it's just lovely to hear Marika's sense of humour has continued. I'm just picking up on the fact that so much is hidden, so much is erased, so much is lost. And I think Audrey might be able to put a bit more information on what I'm going to say. It's in connection with Goldsmiths University in London.
Yeah.
Apparently, they started a British Black History MA, and Audrey very kindly sent a draft of a letter. And as I said, I hope she can put a bit more information. And they are now considering stopping that. And in education, we know that, Liz's face, we know that a lot of Black and GEM students are not taking up history because they don't see the relevance to themselves. And the fact that Goldsmiths pioneered and put out, yes, we're doing this MA course, and quietly, or maybe not so quietly, they are thinking of abandoning it. So Audrey was the one that alerted us to this fact. Thank you.
I didn't know about that. And I must thank Sean for that reference, but that's about Abi Farah's son. There's much about that son everywhere, but not about the father, which is very good.
Right. So it was his father who got the MBE.
The father got the MBE. The son also was awarded something, and so was another son. I mean, it's an amazing family, actually. But it's all that stuff that's on the web that you will find are about the son and not the father.
Right. Okay. Well, that's good to know. Beverly, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, it just reminded me, as I'm so honored to be here with you and with all these wonderful authors and academics and activists. So it's an honor to be here. When you spoke about Mr. Fahim, and I thought, I know somebody else who got an MBE about that date. So, but it's 1 year after, and I'm thinking of Charles Udo Minto in the Northeast, and he got his MBE in 1949. For his services to the colored people in North Shields. So it really, it's about, and we have, I think, in North Shields, a wonderful heritology society who has, it's just wonderful to see people who actually, like yourselves, who are doing that really detailed archival work to unearth the stories of these people. So I feel quite honored and humbled by the people who do the detailed archive work. I don't, only a tiny bit. I appreciate the skills of many others. So thank you.
I think I want to add to what should be researched, that we should look at the parish records. Should look at the court records and the parish records. When I moved down here to East Kent, I went to the cathedral archives, and they found a volunteer to go through the parish records, which are births, deaths, and marriages. And he found many names. Well, the cathedral holds parish records for about 5 parishes, I think it was altogether, maybe even more. But what matters is that people labeled Negro or African begin to be noted from the 17th century. So the parish records need to be researched as well. And of course, newspaper records. I thought I'd have a glance to see what came up if I looked at newspapers in East Kent, just for the word Negro. Doesn't come up. Mainly court, I haven't followed up on them, but I noticed that many of them are court records, but that's fine. It gives you a name to follow up. And I think there are family history societies in many parts of England, and they should be able to help researchers on how to follow up the parish records, because they have experience of family records.
That's fascinating. I was talking earlier and saying that it would be good to have a list of all the different threads that local Black history organisations, societies are interested to explore the Black history of an area and Asian studies, perhaps, so that we'd get a list. So that's an important thing that you're saying, is that this is something that's been certainly under-recorded by the theme of it, and people are beginning to gradually find stories. Audrey?
Well, I was just going to say that I've got a database, like Kathy Chater. I've got a database of parish records. I've got well over 7,000 of them. But that's just, I just collect them whenever I can. But the thing I just wanted to mention was about when Marika said about the court records in the paper. Be aware that if you just look in the newspapers, you will find an awful lot of court cases, and it could give the impression that Black people are always in trouble, always doing bad things. Often, if you read the report, you can realise that what happened was as a result of racism. But in addition to that, quite often the person in the court case is somebody who's complaining. He's the, I can't remember what the official word is. He's not the person who's accused. So you can find them, and then others are just there as witnesses. And as Marika said, that gives you a lead. And if you follow those leads of those names, amazing stories come up. And I mean, an example, you can find examples of that if you look on the African Stories in Hull and East Yorkshire website, where a lot of work was done around 2017 when Hull was City of Culture. And again, starting from the newspapers and the court records, all kinds of family stories turned up, and there's quite a lot of them up online. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you very much indeed. And I think that the work that was done on the African Stories in Hull and East Yorkshire is fantastic. Sean, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, one of the problems we had at BASA was that we couldn't get funding to create a database of our own accumulating parish record material that Marika was receiving continually, and a lot of which went into the newsletters. But we did want to do a database, but we couldn't get the funding. One of the problems is the sheer number of parishes. And it's about I mean, I discussed it with one of the activists in the Society of Antiquaries in Newcastle, and doing a systematic trawl of all the parish records in the northeast is just daunting. So what they were hoping to do was just take a handful of parish records to see what additional information would come forward. So that is a problem. The other problem is, of course, that even when you get a name, the next entry, for instance, when they have children, doesn't necessarily record it. So you actually also have to trace the known surname to see if they have any children, whether they married, they had any children, and when they died, through this, if they're still living in the same parish. And the other problem is you get people who are called, they might be labeled as black from somewhere in India. And of course, that doesn't mean necessarily they were Indian because of African slavery into India. And we do have evidence of African slaves from India coming to Britain. So, you know, interpretation is also can be problematic.
Well, there are lots of problems. There are lots of problems, but you know, the more people do research, the more discussion there will be and solutions found. And as for funding, I must tell you that the total funding I have had for all those books and articles is a total of £2,000. And I might be a research fellow at the Institute of Commonwealth Studies, but what that means is that you get a free library card and a desk. Doesn't mean you get any income. So, you know, it's not easy, and I don't think it's become any easier, very sadly.
Difficult, and I worry as well that when there has been research done on Black history and the themes around this, with Heritage Lottery funding, for example, there was a marvellous project done in Wales called Bittersweet in 2007, and all the records of that have been lost. They were put into the care of the museum service, and there's no records left of it, and yet that was an extraordinarily well-funded initiative that took place then. So yes, this disappearingness of information is very worrying. And other comments on that? Audrey, you've got your hand up still. You still wanting to talk?
No, I just while I'm here, I'll just say that I've put the link to the goldsmith thing in online, and also to the African Stories in Hull and East Yorkshire website on the chat. But I've nothing else to say. Sorry, I forgot to take my hand down.
Oh, that's quite all right. Thank you for bringing our attention to that. And I'm fascinated about researching local history. And is it Faversham where you live in now?
Yes, I live near Faversham, yes.
And I read up the stuff you've been putting in their newsletter there about local history. And I think that's a good way, putting it in the local newsletter. But to get people researching in local areas, I think is really important, because many historical societies, for example, the one in Wolverhampton, which I know about, they're not interested to look at the Black history stories or Asian study stories. They have made that quite clear. So that's why we're thinking that it would be an idea, although we have an active Black History Month organisation, that isn't their focus isn't always Black history research. So okay, right. You want to tell us a little bit about what you've been finding out in Faversham, because I think it's so interesting, this local history.
No, I can't really tell you very much, because it's research I've really only just begun.
Right.
What is important is that there are records in the parish records here of Black people, baptisms, and a very one that's very close to my heart is there's a record of a woman in Davington, which is where Bob Geldof lives now, of the church there paying somebody, Mrs. Gibbs, I think it was 6 shillings to allow the Black woman to give birth to her child in her shed. Imagine. And then there's an entry a couple of weeks later about paying a Black man to go away. Now, I clearly will have to try to figure out how on earth to research that. Did the woman die? What happened to the baby? Was the man her husband? The father of the child? Why was he being paid to go away? What were the attitudes then? You know, so it's very interesting. And when I have enough energy, I will see if I can knock on Bob Geldof's door and say, well, you're living here now. This is your history. Would you like to research some of it? Go on.
Beverly, you wanted unmute yourself.
Yeah, oops, sorry, just a question. I wondered about the response when you put local newsletters out with, you know, little snippets of Black history, of evidence of Black people. What kind of response do you get from the local people, if any?
No response whatsoever. So I'm going to do much more. I think certainly the Faversham History Society doesn't seem to exist anymore, and they had absolutely no interest in what I was doing at all. They didn't want to believe anything I said. But the present head of the Faversham Society is interested. So I think he would publish everything I want published. And maybe I can get some of that in the local newspapers and maybe on some of the local websites as well. You know, that might be a way of interesting people. And I will also see if any of the local schools could possibly give me some time. Talk to the children, to the pupils there to say, well, you know, here's some history that you could research.
The school sounds a good move. I mean, I've been doing a little work following the booklet with some of the schools, and it's very interesting, the very positive response of the sort of age 10 to 11, very engaging. I mean, a lot depends on of course, on the teachers they've got, and all credit to those teachers. And doing the work with 16 to 18-year-olds, totally different. You know, they are much too self-conscious to open their mouth, really. Maybe it depends again on their teachers, but I just think when we're not getting responses from adults, or even if we are getting responses from adults, that perhaps the schools is the way to go.
Yeah, well, I think I'd like to sort of call the talk something like, do you know who you are? Are you a Jute? Are you a Celt? Are you a Pig? Are you a Norman? And I said, well, do you know where the royalty comes from? Do you? So let's look at, you know, Queen so-and-so and King so-and-so and where they came from. And I said, well, now let us also look at people from Africa, now that we've looked at all these people from all over Europe. But what about people from Africa? Didn't they also come here? You know, and then provide some of the necessary answers. And I think most pupils would be interested. I think they'd be a bit confused about our royalty, even if I don't mention how much we pay for them. But I think that, you know, it might just interest them. Anyway, I'm going to try. I
think it's a fascinating line to take, and I think your point though about local history societies again, I think is interesting. Sean, you wanted to come in. Oh, Bundy's joining us.
Yeah, I mean, one doesn't always necessarily get a response to a particular thing in a newsletter, but there are all kinds of other ways in which people subsequently let one know about the fact they picked up on things. A few years ago, I organised Jack Bueller of Newby and Jack Community Trust to give a talk on plaques, as part of the Wandsworth Heritage Festival. And one of the people there has recently said that he was inspired by that presentation to begin to look at his local area in Tooting. And he's produced a fantastic project called Somerstown, which started off as the First World War project, looking at all the ordinary soldiers who lived in a small group of streets in Tooting. But he's developed other projects. So there's a plaque to a jazz musician called Sadie Crawford, who was married to an African jazz musician. So there's a plaque to them. And he's recently done a plaque to an important black record shop studio in Tooting. So all sorts of good things can come out of either people reading, they get motivated, or attending talks. But one doesn't always necessarily get the email or the letter that says so. But anyway, so there's lots of initiatives do take place as a result of all the work that's going on in its different forms.
Thank you very much indeed. And I think it's really brilliant to have so many people here who've done so much and have got so many ideas to share. Now, Marcia, how are you doing?
Well, at the moment, I was just about to say, Miss Sherwood, what a wonderful recount of your history, fantastic. And I heard the word campaign and I got excited because that's one of the things I like to do. I mean, yes, so in Birmingham, there's lots of buzz going on. So there's the World Reimagine project, which is about pushing through indirectly a Black curriculum. So I'll put the website address, and we're heavily involved in that. Right now, we are Black Heritage Walks, that's my organisation. We are having talks with Birmingham City University to become part of their Black Studies degree programme. So that's very exciting. And I mean, I'll talk to Liz about this. We've just worked with our first corporation, Cadbury's. They wanted to, how can I put it, acknowledge their links to slavery. And I've done the research, and I mean, there's lots more research for me to do, but the research I found when I presented it to them, quite interestingly, they went, "Ooh, we know what you're saying is the truth, but it's too embarrassing for us to narrate this." Oh yes, we've got to go back, and I knew it would be, because just to cut a very long story short, the Bourneville village in Selly Oak, that has the narrative, it's all over the internet, of the fact that it was built on the backs of slaves in Sao Tome and Principe, which is on the west coast of Africa. It's all over the internet, but they have their own walk there, and they know it should be included, and they don't know how to, because they actually said to me, this is embarrassing, Marcy, because what they're trying to do is sell the beauty of Bourneville. And then the flip side is, but there's a lot of bloodshed from it. So I'm in continual talks with them about this, about not being embarrassed. So yeah, there's lots going on that way. And we're also now being asked to become official researchers. I'll send the link actually with Cambridge University. So that's interesting. I'll send you that link, Liz.
Thank you. Yeah, great. Well, thank you very much indeed. And I'm truly honoured to have been with you this evening, with so many people who've done excellent things over time, and difficult things over time, and frustrating things, because you do wonder if things aren't deliberately hidden, as Marika says. I'd like to invite you, Marika, to come back and join us again. You can see how informal we are. We explore aspects of Black history and perhaps Asian studies that people offer their contributions. And next week we're going to be talking about a number of the books that have been written by people who've joined us over the last sessions. So that should be an interesting one. But yes, I'm really honoured to be with you all, but especially honoured to be with you, Marika, and to have learned a little of your story. And I've got lots of reading to do now and lots of catching up to do to make sure that I know more. Okay, so and just before if that's okay, Marika, was there anything else you wanted to add?
All right, let me add just one thing, because there are often so many celebrations of World War I and World War II. And when we celebrate World War I, the fighting in Africa is always omitted. The French and the British wanted to take over the colonies owned in inverted commas by Germany. And tens of thousands of Africans and West Indians fought there. It's unclear how many died. It's unclear if any of them were paid. From what I found, I imagine many of them were recruited at the point of a gun. And because neither Germany nor Britain could send any food to the tens of thousands of Africans fighting each other, they ate all the local food. So I am guessing that many local people starved to death. This is written up. And please, when you see celebrations of World War I, just mention to people that there was this war fought in Africa from one colonial office to take over another colonial, and that probably tens of thousands of Africans died. I think that is enormously important, and of course so embarrassing that it has to be omitted from all celebrations of World War I. So please try to make sure it's included.
Thank you very much for raising that to our attention. It's something I've looked a little at before, but not spoken in those terms. Thank you so much, Marika. Absolutely fantastic. And I'd just like to welcome Dr. Bunmi Olisan. Great that you've been able to join us, and we did enjoy last week's session as well.
Do use me.
Yes. So we're looking forward to the session next week, but I'm just going to do a quick catch up on things that I've found over the last little while. David says, an absolute honour and inspiration you are, Marika. Really, thank you. And before you popped up on our screen, we also had some really positive short presentations about the work that you've been doing. So I'm just going to share my screen.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, we can chat a little bit after we've just gone through these. The Walter Rodney Symposium was last Saturday. I don't know if anybody managed to log into it, but that should be presented online, and I should be able to get the information for you for that. So that should be okay. I just noticed that on Eventbrite, there's a Black History Every Month events that inspire action, education and connection. So there's no end of interesting information there. I just picked out 3. One is a reading group, Testimonies of the History of Jamaica, going on today. It changes the time to me here in Australia. So I think that's a bit later on for you today. A virtual tour of Frederick Douglass in UK and Ireland, that's on the 27th of April. And Black History Walk, Secrets of Soho. So I didn't know, Marcia, if you knew about this possibility that you could advertise your Black History Walks on.
No.
Interesting. A new book on the British Empire, harrowing, it says, but can counterweight to the current political push to the talk of the benefits of empire. And I think one of the things that we've talked about before, and Marcia and I have spent some time talking about, is the pushback. And we've been talking about the situation in Edinburgh, where Professor Sir Jeff Palmer's contributions have been undermined. So I think this might be a really good book for anybody to read. And the article, "The British Empire Was Much Worse Than You Realise," is really interesting. That was in the New Yorker, so that's another one for you to look up. And this is Carolyn Elkins, who is the professor at Harvard and founder of Harvard Centre for African Studies, in her book. So that and another one from the New Yorker there, comparing white supremacy in the US to the caste system in India. Interesting and complex stories. So I think that's it then. Yeah, just a short view this week.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Can I show people this book? I don't know if people have seen it. How Britain Underdeveloped the Caribbean.
Oh, yes, yes.
By Hilary Beckles.
Yeah.
It's only he was talking about it a week or so ago, and I think it's clearly it's in honor of Walter Rodney's seminal work and continue. So I think a book perhaps worth looking at. Quite pricey, unfortunately, but I think worth getting or worth trying to get.
I think it's really interesting. We talked about it a few weeks ago, and there's an online presentation with Sir Hilary Beckles talking about the book. So we can share that
at SOAS.
Yes, at SOAS.
It's on the SOAS website. Yeah.
So that's an interesting link again. Thank you very much for that. So,
last night, sorry Liz, last night at the Jamaican High Commission, in celebration of the coming on the 6th of August, the 60 years of Jamaica independence, they had a book launch of the Jamaican Black Britain in Britain.
Good.
But it was on YouTube, so people are able to, revisit it. And I managed to buy a book. You can buy a book if you want one. I got one. I paid for mine through somebody who was involved in it yesterday, and apparently they told me that I'm in it. Apparently there's 550 Jamaican Black Britons in the book. So I don't know how they got me in it, but I'm looking forward to receiving it, and I shall present it.
That will be wonderful. Thank you. I'm so glad that's been published, because I know they were anxious that the costs of publication were enormous. And I do hope that the two people who the North Wales Jamaica Society nominated, we nominated Enrico Stennett in his fantastic work, and we nominated Karen's dad. Shame to say, I've forgotten his name. It's gone midnight here. Yes, fantastic. I'm really pleased about that. So any more updates? Alison, I'm glad you've been able to join us.
I'm really sorry, because it went right out of my head, and it was only because Audrey rang me up. Have you forgotten? And I had forgotten, and I'm really, really sorry. And it's lovely to see Marika again, because I first met Marika, I think it was in 1994 at a BASA conference in Nottingham, because Audrey had told me about it. I'd met Audrey and she told me she was going to this conference in Nottingham, and it was fantastic. And I've been to various BASA conferences, and Marika once stayed with me a long time ago. So I'm sorry, I'll have to watch the recording. I'm so angry with myself for having forgotten it. I can't understand how I forgot about it. Anyway, hello Marika, it's lovely to see you again. I last saw you in London at a conference in London, and you were going to take loads of the old BASA newsletters to the what's it called down in London?
Black Cultural Archive.
Yes. So she needed to get off and go there to drop these booklets off that used to have reports of all these parish records. It used to be great excitement receiving these booklets during the year. Yeah. Anyway.
Right, okay, so
Just a
Beverly?
quick one. Talking about Jamaica reminded me of the exhibition at the museum in Liverpool on Jamaican art. Really interesting exhibition with lots of interlinks. And I think they either had a conversation, had a what's the word?
Flyer about it.
No, they had a conference.
Oh, yes.
Either had or about to have, and it looked, I mean, I was doing something else. It looked really fantastic, the intersection between history, art, and culture. And it was all about Jamaica. And this is in one of the museums in Liverpool. The exhibition is still on, even if the conference has finished.
But I'm sure they'll post it, and I'll try and pick up the different things that have gone on in the last few months and then put them all together and list them up. I will try over Easter. Okay, well, I'm going to wrap the session up now with a great many thanks to you again, Marika. I'm so glad you're able to join us. When we finish,
Thank you.
we can just chat. So thank you very much indeed, and an honour that you join us, and an honour to be with so many other wonderful people. Thanks very much, Sense.
Bye, everybody.